Following on from my illusion of detail video from last week, I thought I'd show you another fun exercise. And I'm going to do the majority of the painting using a piece of sponge and a mist bottle just to wet the paper ever so slightly. I might use some plastic cards for some scraping as the painting goes on, but we'll see. This is quite a fun exercise, especially if you're struggling a little bit with painting things with the brush, or really if you're just looking for a fun exercise just to mix things up a little bit, then this might be the kind of thing that you're looking for. So I'll wet the paper all over just a little bit, and I'll get some water in that sponge as well, and then wring out as much of the water as I can. Now I'm using a piece of natural sponge. You can use a kitchen sponge or a bathroom sponge if that's all you have, but I personally prefer a natural sponge. So I'll pick up a little bit of blue, grab that with a sponge, and really just dragging the paint into the water that's already on the paper very lightly, getting some very sort of soft colour in that sky. Not looking for any real detail in the sky at all, just a little bit of colour in there to tint it a bit. So I'm mixing a little bit of raw sienna into that mixture as well, and then dragging the sponge across the surface this time, building up a tiny little bit of colour down in the land. So I'm slowly building up layers as I go. A little bit of burnt sienna in there as well. I can dab that in places and get tiny little bits of texture starting to happen already. Now let's get a little bit more cobalt blue. I can lay in a little bit of distance, so some distant trees. Very lightly dabbing with the sponge. And nice thing about using a sponge is that you haven't really got full control over it, so it makes a lot of accidental marks, and sometimes these can work out to be the best areas in a painting like this. So I've touched a little bit of raw sienna into that mixture now as well, so getting some variation in there. A bit more blue. And so by doing very little at all really, just dabbing that sponge around, I'm building up a sense of distance. I can soften that edge, very lightly dragging the sponge across. Let's get some slightly darker blues, so I've got some ultramarine, mix that in, a little bit more cobalt. Let's touch a bit of light red into it as well, just the tiniest little bit. So I can get the suggestion of a few little areas of shadow. Let's get some stronger colour in there now. So I'll pick up some cadmium yellow. Can mix that into some of that blue so it instantly makes a green. Tone it down with some light red. Cadmium yellow can be a little bit too bright sometimes, I think, but just a touch of light red into it tones it down. So let's build up some sunlit trees. A bit more cadmium yellow. A little bit more light red. Make that slightly oranger this time. And so laying that orangey green, I suppose it's kind of mixed. It mixes together in the sponge as well, and that's another quite nice thing about using this technique is you're pretty much mixing as you go in the sponge and on the paper. I've not washed the sponge at all as I've been going, so a lot of that paint stays behind. So I've mixed a little bit more blue into that mixture, a little bit greener now. Can start getting some textural things happening in that land. Let's get a little bit more red in there. And so creating that illusion that there's a lot of things happening, a lot of things going on, by doing hardly anything at all. Let's touch some blue into that mixture, a bit of cobalt blue. So I've made a fairly dark green now. And so now building up a sense of perspective, getting some cooler colours off in the distance and then darker, slightly warmer in the foreground. So I'm going to rinse out the sponge now. And again, wring all the water out of it as much as possible. I want to try and get a little bit of cleaner colour. So let's get some more cadmium yellow, mix that into what I've already got there. So it's quite bright now. Tiniest little bit of light red in there again. Tone that colour down. Make sure I've got as much water out of that sponge as I can. And I pick up pretty much all of that paint, and I'm going to have a large tree here just left of centre. And so very quickly, you see how quickly the sponge covers the paper, and give that tiniest little mist as well with the bottle. More cadmium yellow, more light red, vary that mixture, a bit more cobalt blue. Let's get some slightly darker paint underneath. So getting variation in these greens. And I'm always turning the sponge, moving it around, rotating as I dab it down onto the paper. So I don't want to make the same mark twice, if that makes sense. So constantly moving it around. So I've got even more blue into that mixture now, and it's going quite dark. So some shadow colour coming down in the lower portion of this tree. I'll have it slightly darker on the left hand side as well. I think the light will be coming in from the right hand side. Let's touch a little bit of Payne's grey into that mixture as well, save a bit of time, make that quite dark, but it's still green, so very dark green. So bring that up the left hand side of the tree, down to the bottom of the foliage. Can lay some of these darks around the land as well, touch some of that into these trees on the right hand side too. So I'm kind of building up connections now. Once I start getting the dark painting, I like to connect the dark shapes together, and it's not hard lines that are connected everywhere, but tiny little areas, and it creates more flow and more consistency within the painting. So mix that up, tiny little bit darker still. Touch some darks at the bottom of those trees, in some of those grasses in the foreground. And now I think I need to dry this before I move on to the next stage and then bring it all together. Okay, I've dried it, so I'm just going to use a brush to bring it all together. I'm going to use one of these little double-ended brushes made by Famui. It's not a paid promotion, just thought people quite often ask me what brushes I use, so I thought I'd give this one a mention. It's got a dagger on one end and a round on the other. Let's bring in a little bit of water on the surface of the paper and grab a little bit of burnt sienna. So now these few areas with the brush will hopefully bring this all together. So let's lay in some branches and some tree trunks. Let's get some Payne's grey again. Go quite dark at the base of the tree trunk. And bringing up a few little branches. Now just looking where there's a gap, so bringing the branch up and then leaving a little space and then bringing it back out towards the top. Gives the impression that the branch is weaving in and out of that foliage. Again, fairly dark towards the base of the tree. Now let's connect that trunk down into the land behind that little tuft of grass. And looking at the oval shape and seeing where I can add a little branch, so I'll bring one out onto the right hand side there. Flick out a couple of smaller twigs towards the top. Don't want to do too much, don't want to overwork it. And let's pick up a little bit of blue paint. Mix that in with what I've already got there. I can bring up a trunk on this tree on the right hand side. Very simple, couple of little marks. Don't want to make too much of this tree at all, and keep that very simple, very vague. And the suggestion of a few little trunks in these other tree shapes. I've always found it quite amazing really how you can have a seemingly just looks like a little blob of paint. As soon as you add a trunk and a couple of branches, it somehow brings it all together. So same on this far left, this little area there, a few little twig shapes. Flick up some suggestions of some tree trunks going off in the distance as well, very lightly. And just those few simple marks has created the impression that there's a lot going on there now. So now I've turned the brush around, so I'm using the other end, which is a round brush. So I'm going to add in a few suggestions of some shadows coming across the land, and then that should just bring the whole painting together. So I've got some blue, cerulean blue, and a little bit of alizarin. So I've mixed the warm grey, so light coming in from the right hand side. Let's lay some of that paint across, bring it down and across the land. Got to make sure I don't cover up everything in the land. I want to still keep an impression that there's a lot of light going on. So drag that paint in, get some water on the brush as well, and soften all the edges. And now laying these shadows in has created the shape of a path running up from the foreground and then off into that distance quite nicely, just by adding these little bits of warm grey. Creates the shape of that path. And now let's bring this shadow across the foreground. Now I can bring that all the way across the foreground there, and then focus on that little bit of light in the middle there. Let's just add a tiniest little bit of texture to some of these trees. Just using a little bit of that green that's left in the palette. Now I don't want to do too much of this either. I think I did the majority of the work with the sponge. I don't want to cover that up, so tiny little area of texture is enough. And I think with that I'll leave the painting alone. Okay, that's the finished painting there. A very simple exercise using the sponge and bringing it all together with a few little marks with the brush at the end. It's quite a nice exercise really. It makes painting things like trees very easy, I find. And you have to make sure you don't have too much water on the paper, otherwise it just washes off. But practice and then get used to the control and how much water you need, and it really is quite simple. And it's quite a nice finished painting, I think. Very loose and impressionistic, but do give it a go. Let me know what you think and how you got on. But I'll be back again next week, so have a great week everybody, and thanks for watching as always. Cheers then.